Okay, hello. It is April 5th today, and this is class one of the 2018 very first pioneering program called the Gut Reset. So, I'm going to cover a few things today. So I always like to I often do notes for other people's like courses or podcasts or stuff. And I think I don't know if it's just naturally how I am or if it's a product of that, but I like things to like be clearly delineated in my brain. And I don't care if anybody else does it, but for me, it really helps for things to be like really, really clear. So maybe it's because I do notes and stuff that my brain is used to organizing things kind of in a more clear way. Maybe not. But I do want to kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about in each classes to give you a sense of get your bearings, as it were. So I'll introduce myself. We'll talk a bit about why we're doing this. We'll talk a bit about some of the challenges of doing this. We'll talk a bit about what the microbiome is and why it matters and what we plan to do about it. We'll go over all of the stuff that you received to make sure that makes sense. And I know that most of you, just as the week timing is really weird for this first class, I have a facilitation I have to do after. Most of you are going to watch this by recording. That's totally fine. If you show up live, you can ask questions. You can do that in the chat if you want. So you can either send me me only a chat message, or you can send it to everybody. And the other option is you can unmute yourself and ask it live. So that's kind of what we're going to do here. I'm just going to add a note. Remind myself of that. Okay, so who I am. So some of you don't know me. There's a few, it's probably about an equal split. So about half people have worked with me in the past and are trying something new with me. And half of you I've never met. You're either, brought by a friend, or I have no idea how you found me, but you did. So hi. Those of you who know me, you don't have to listen to this part, but my name is Christy Schmier. I owned a, sorry, I'm just going to repin this. I owned a holistic health facility, massage, acupuncture, all that stuff, for 10 years. And I shut it down a year and a half ago, maybe. And now I just work out of my home. So my primary focus for the last probably 12 years has always been nutrition. I love nutrition. I love the idea. I grew up especially in terms of the microbiome, very wholesome, very healthy. I grew up on a farm in northern Alberta. We grew pretty much everything we ate. We ate like almost no processed food. I never really had any, I've never in my life had a Tylenol or most over-the-counter medication. I've had a couple of aspirins when I burst my eardrum. I didn't even get pain medication when I had surgery, just because I was too nervous about how I would react. I've never had recreational drugs besides alcohol. I don't drink caffeine, not that caffeine's bad, but this is just a little preface about, who I am. When I moved to the city for university in 1996, my health pretty dramatically changed. And I chalk that up to environment, a brand new environment, stress. I was going to university, and a diet change, obviously. So that change, when I moved to Edmonton in 1996, I was 18 at the time. It was my first bout of acne. I've never had bad skin before that. I started getting, I'd always had digestive issues as a kid. I would have just really painful digestive issues, and I used to have a lot of ear infections as a kid. Those continued. I've never had the flu. I don't get colds really. Generally a very healthy person, but the digestive stuff got worse again. It was as a kid, and then as my teens got better, or as I got into my teens, it got better. When I moved to Edmonton, it got worse again, and then my skin was the most dramatic one for me. So I got really interested in diet and how what you eat and what you do to your body affects your health. So I started experimenting on myself and just learning, and then, got more formal education. But I mostly just like reading and researching. It's mostly, I am not going to be the most formally educated nutrition consultant person you're going to find, but I am probably one of the most voracious readers, and very interested in it. And I tend to be very good at being able to take information that is a bit more complex and make it more simple. And I try to have a lot of common sense about things. So I try my best. I do get sucked in every once in a while to not get sucked into fads or, things that are maybe have interesting testimonials, but not a lot of research behind them. So I try to do my best to make things as concrete, simple, doable, and sensible as possible for people. So I got really into, as soon as I started learning about the gut microbiome, microbiota, I got really interested in, I'd say, digestion and the accompanying kind of gut and hormones are my major interests in health. So that's kind of where I've been focusing over the years. And as far as hormones are concerned, the best way to affect them is generally by affecting the gut. So it always comes back to the gut for me. I truly think, I think it gets said a lot, like, this is going to be the most important thing that's ever happened to health since, since antibiotics and since vaccines, blah. But I really do, like, the evidence to me, without being hyperbolic and without being, someone who tries to avoid jumping on bandwagons, I really do think this is going to be the future of medicine. And I hopefully will convince you of that as well over the next 4 weeks. So that's a bit about who I am. Why we're doing this is, unlike a lot of the new breakthroughs in health, they really can't figure out much in terms of how to help people balance their microbiota that isn't food related. So much of it is in your control. Most of how they know how to adjust someone's bacteria is through diet. So to me, that's the most exciting part, because corporations can't take that away from you and make money off of it as much. They still can, they do. But to me, that's the most exciting part, is it's really empowering, because this is information that you can use. And I mean, I'm not going to promise you that in 3 weeks, like, when your gut microbiota changes, your whole life's going to change, and all these diseases are going to be cured and all the weight's going to drop off. That's not how it works. But we have a lot of control long term over what our bacteria look like and then what they do for our health. There are some things you can do short term, and I'll talk about those as well. But as for the most part, this is something that's almost wholly in your control. So I think that's pretty exciting. So that's why we're doing this. So now I just want to talk about, just a little preface here. I kind of am becoming increasingly wary about and uneasy about bringing up a lot of topics with health with people. I find that we have become, especially on like the left side of the quote unquote political spectrum, very entrenched in dogma that people get really, really offended really easily when you talk about areas, because I think because there tends to be such judgment around that area, they get very protective of anybody even talking about that area. So things I'm talking about that to do with, very specifically with the gut microbiota, would be things like mental health stuff. People get really touchy about that. That's because it's obviously been a stigma for so many years. And I think sometimes people have trouble hearing the words I'm saying, that it's not a condemnation. It is just a description of what is happening. The same thing would happen with pregnancies. I find there's a lot of judgment about if you had a C-section, if you breastfed, blah, 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 blah. And people get so sensitive now that I feel like I can't even tell people the risks. And I just want you to know the risks. If you disregard those risks, that's fine. I'm not going to judge you for it. I would feel very sad if you didn't know, and then 10 years later, why didn't anybody tell me the risks of me doing ABC? There's a lot of really People get very defensive about when I talk about medications. And I am not one of these people who is like, stop all your medications. Medications are bad. Chemicals are bad. That is not me. But I think people are used to that and, again, get defensive. Even just talking about what you eat, people get very defensive. Autism is a very big one, which is, from all the evidence, incredibly, at least some of the more dramatic symptoms, incredibly related to our gut bacteria. I'm not even really going to touch it because it gets, to me, that is one of the most ones that is most fraught with like just walls. People put up just walls of like, I don't even want to hear it. I don't want to discuss it. So I'm going to stay away from that one mostly. Mental illness, like I talked about, and weight. I find actually weight is the one people are least sensitive about of all those, which seems like it would be the most personal to the most of us. But so what I'm going to tell you is I may say something, I'm only presenting facts, but some things I say, there might be a perception of some judgment or value judgment or something like that in some of these things I say, and me telling you that there's just no point. If you really have a problem with something I'm telling you, feel free to tell me. But I also just invite you to notice where your back gets up when we talk about health, and why. Beyond like, it's because it personally affects me or it affects my son or something like that. I want you to really notice why that's such a trigger for you. Because it's interesting, because I can talk about dementia prevention, and that's fine. But if I talk about ADHD, people get really upset. So I think, obviously kids come in there, and I think stigma must come in there. But I just want to put that up front, that I'm aware that some of these are very touchy subjects. And I just want you to know that I just think it's important that we can talk about them, and that there isn't a value judgment in the things I'm talking about. I really just want to present you with research about how those things are connected to our microbiota, to our bacteria in our gut. So just a little something I want to talk about there. Okay, so now what is the microbiota? So there is a difference between the words microbiome and microbiota in terms of like what precisely it means, but let's just use them synonymously at this point. Essentially, this is like the the system within which this life system lives. Our body is the system, and then all of these bacteria are like us on Earth. It's the microbiome. So there is about 100 trillion bacteria on us at any given time, and it's about estimations vary greatly, but 3 to 4 pounds of our body weight is going to be just bacteria. A very large portion of our bowel movements are bacteria that have been excreted, but we are largely bacteria. There is a myth out there that we are 10 times more human cells than we are, 10 times more bacteria than we are human cells, and that actually has been just proven. It's about equal. But regardless, we've got a lot of bacteria in our body. So we've got a lot of things that, so usually in a twin study, you would always know, so fraternal twins are no more genetically related than just any brothers and sisters, but identical twins will have the exact same DNA. That is not the case with your microbiome. You're going to have a distinctly different microbiome from everybody, including, if you had one, an identical twin. So our microbiome is a reflection of our genes, but it is more diverse. Well, not always more diverse, but it is different from other people, and it will change by race, it'll change by age group, it'll change by gender, it'll change by... They can actually tell what country you're from, typically. Like if they looked at your profile, they would be able to be like, yep, this person is Dutch. Yes, this person is from Venezuela. This person probably lives in northern Venezuela, because they can tell hugely whether you're from Northern Europe or Southern Europe. So there's really interesting differences in people's bacteria. And as we learn more, we're going to be able to do more and more with that information. But right now, if someone was to, someone who knew stuff about this, not just anyone, a scientist was to look at your poop, essentially, and dissect all the bacteria that has been excreted from your body, which isn't even a full representation of bacteria in your body, they would have a better chance of blindly predicting your weight than someone who had all 20,000 of your genes. So if they mapped your entire genome versus they mapped your, microbiota genome, they would have a much better chance of telling you where you were from and what your weight was if they had the bacteria. So it's incredibly predictive of our health, of what we look like even, and where we're from, and even our age. So it's really interesting, the stuff that you can learn from this. And just as a side note, I'll send the link out with the email recording and put it in the Facebook group. But there are a few different projects. There's one in the UK. I don't think anyone hears, I think everybody hears from North America, but there's one in the UK and one in America called like the American Gut Project and the UK Gut Project. And if you send a small donation, and I mean monetary donation, and then also a fecal donation, they send you a package and you just use like a swab to swab like toilet paper they use to wipe with. And you take that and you send it back to them with the monetary donation. And as long as you're okay with them using it for scientific purposes, with a lot of transparency, they will send you back a printout of your microbiome. I haven't tried it yet, so I'm not sure if it's open to Canadians. But I'll give it a try, or you can give it a try. I will post the link, but you can, in the meantime, just Google the American Gut Project and just see. So anyways, there are also labs that do this, that test for and show you what your microbiota look like. It's just not going to mean a lot at this point because we don't know enough about the individual bacterium. We just know certain things about which balances and which particular ones do which. But it seems to be more, as opposed to like, you need this strain and this strain and this strain, is you need to have a diverse microbiota. So you need to have lots of bacteria. And so to give you an idea of what that means, so we have 50 million per teaspoon of contents in our small intestine. So 50 million per teaspoon bacteria. And we don't even have that many in our small intestine. That's a small amount. If you go into our large intestine, you times that number by 10,000, and that's how many bacteria per teaspoon you have in your large intestine. And they have profound effects on, like, they can govern things like blood pressure. They can govern, like I said, weight. They can govern how much calories you're going to extract. They can dictate your immune system, what's going on with your immune system, what it's reacting to. Some of the bacteria clean the walls of your gut. Some poke holes in it. Some cause disease. Some protect us from disease. Some protect us from heart disease, from dementia. They have actually changed bacteria in mice in particular. And you might be like, and rightly so, think, well, what mice that doesn't relate to humans. But there are only certain ways, because what they do is they create mice that live completely sterilely. So they don't have any bacteria. You obviously can't do that with humans. So they create sterile mice that are born by sterile C-section and kept in a completely sterile environment, access to only very sterile water and food. Obviously I think it has ethical issues for rats, but it would have very strong ethical issues for humans to test this. But then what they can do is they can transfer bacteria and test different things and see and know for sure that it is the bacteria causing those issues. They can, just by inserting different bacteria, cause the rats to gain dramatic amounts of weight, cause them to change their risk behavior, which we're going to talk about more detail in a later class. So like with this bacteria, the rat suddenly starts taking greater risks. With this one, it stops taking greater risks. It'll affect mood. It'll affect your thought processes. It'll affect your ability to remember things, like in terms of dementia and stuff like that. So it affects almost literally every aspect of your life is governed by your genes, by your microbiota. And luckily, that one is a lot more mutable. So a lot more malleable, sorry. So we can actually change our microbiota, whereas it's a lot harder to change our DNA. And we can actually change our microbiota to change our DNA in some ways. So it's pretty cool, especially if you look at generationally, what you can do if you were expecting a child. for your bacteria that will actually affect, even before your child is conceived, what that child will look like and how their health will play out. So it's really exciting. This even changes, like, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, where some people are really susceptible to mosquito bites and some people aren't. I am one of the lucky people who aren't. That's because of the changes, your difference in your bacteria. So there's just certain bacteria that really cause mosquitoes to flock to you. And they've discovered that there's certain places on your body where that bacteria lives, which is a great thing because then we can target those areas to prevent malaria or Zika, because we can just target those specific, like I think it's the feet is a big one. So we can target those areas. So I always wonder if, my feet, I've never had a problem with stinky feet, but if I go like for a while without showering, my armpits get really stinky. Sorry, this is probably too much information, but deal with it. We're going to be talking about a lot of things that are a little TMI. So I always wondered if maybe that was why, like I get really ripe if I haven't showered in a couple of days. For some people, like my boyfriend, nothing. You can't smell anything. And he attracts a lot of mosquitoes and I don't. So I have a lot more of a rank smell, but my feet never smell. So I'm always curious about that. But it is actually comes from your bacteria. So just a reminder, because a few more people have joined us, you can at any time send a chat, either just to me or to the whole group, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question. I love it when people ask questions. I find people get very apologetic when they do, and I love it. If you're not part of the Facebook group yet, I highly recommend you join it. And Ashley's actually asked quite a bit of questions, which I always think are so helpful, and which is why I like the group setting, because they're questions that I don't think to tell you and that you might not think to ask, or maybe you just aren't the question asking type. So that's why I love the group settings. So you can check those out. But yeah, just a reminder, anytime, feel free to interrupt me. Those are kind of some of the different things. And again, they study identical twins to find out what differences are. There's huge studies between these sterile rats and between identical twins that give us a lot of the information we have about this. But again, it is a very new field. So I or no one can tell you like, oh, you have this problem, here's a prescription for these 3 bacteria and that problem will be solved. We do know some. So for people who have things like IBS or Crohn's colitis, there are definitely some probiotics that are specialized that work quite well. Women who have vaginal imbalances, which at some point in your life most women do, because it's a lot of pH and bacteria to balance, and a lot of things coming at us that want to throw it out of balance. There are specific ones that help with that. So there's some that help with anxiety. But as a general rule, as we develop, we're hopefully going to have more like bespoke treatments where we can customize a probiotic to what that person needs. Right now, the best we can do is throw as much beneficial bacteria at our system as possible. And this does a couple things. It crowds out the bad bacteria, even if it doesn't stay. So they've often said, like they've done research and they've been like, probiotics just often, they'll pass mostly through your system. But even when they just pass through, they somehow disrupt the balance so that you can have more positive, the positive bacteria can take a better hold. There've also been complaints that probiotics can't work because your stomach acid would digest them before they got to your colon. And that doesn't appear to be true. It is true for most of the bacteria, but that's why you want to have 10 million. Some of them get through, some of them are strong and tough enough to get through, and then they colonize really quickly if they catch on. And we know that people who eat probiotic-rich foods have more diverse microbiota. So we know that there is a food and potentially probiotic system that can get through and colonate in our large intestine, which is the most important place. The large intestine is where we want most of the colonization to happen. We don't actually know a lot about the small intestine and bacteria. We make a lot of assumptions based on the large intestine, but the large intestine, for better or worse, is our focus right now. And I say I have anything to do with this research. I am the secret scientist downstairs in my basement. I'm not. I just like to read and synthesize information and give it to other people. So when I say we, That I don't actually mean we. It's like we as a sports team, when you're like talking about your sports team like you're somehow part of it, which you're not. You didn't do anything. That's kind of my involvement with this. There are even certain bacteria that they know. So I don't know if you've ever heard of, I know you've almost guaranteed you've heard of the connection between red meat and heart disease. The interesting thing about that, though, is that they found, so it's TMAO is the thing that is creating this connection. So people have high levels of TMAO after eating quite a bit of red meat. That's what gives the inflammation to the heart and causes heart disease. Interestingly, though, so it's certain bacteria that changes TMA to TMAO, and that's what makes it dangerous. But people, like if you look at a vegan or a vegetarian, if they ate a steak or even like a few steaks, they wouldn't change to TMAO. Their TMAO levels wouldn't rise at all because their bacteria, their bacteria will adjust to what they eat. And so their bacteria, what's colonized in their system is like, well, there's no need for meat-eating bacteria because we don't eat meat. So a lot of that goes away. Eventually, if they kept eating steak, they would start getting those bacteria, and then they would start creating TMAO, and they'd be at greater risk for heart disease. But to me, this is a wonderful example of what we can use this information for, is if we take breaks from eating certain things, a lot of the risk goes away. So you can eat red meat, you just can't eat it all the time. So, and also there's protective qualities in certain things in a lot of vegetables. So if you eat red meat, you really love red meat, you know, you can have it 3 days a week maybe, as long as you're having lots of vegetables, theoretically. If you take a break from it and then come back to it. So it just kind of gives us a bit more information on the kind of some of the leeway we have and how much our system changes in like somewhere between 24 hours to 6 days. Our microbiota really shifts a lot, and we can actually make these changes that can offer us some protection against these studies that tell us one thing is bad. There's something I was going to say about that. Oh yeah, so that relates to something else I want to talk about. So like I said, 24 to 6 days, they notice, you know, your diet can dramatically shift your bacteria. But it's like, not to disappoint you guys, but it's like a full year really before you really start seeing like dramatic shifts in what your digestive system will do long term. That doesn't mean that short-term things like this 3 weeks don't do incredible things for your system. But just so you know, this is meant as a gateway into a lifestyle, not as a replacement for a lifestyle. The beauty of a gut reset or focusing on what you can do to build your microbiota is it actually protects you against a lot of the dangers. So you can have periodic junk food, if your gut microbiome is mostly very diverse, you know, has quite a bit of bacteria, and the bacteria is primarily those that are, you know, thrive off of vegetables. So the ones that thrive off of the fiber from vegetables are the ones that are, you know, the most healthy. But the cool thing is that a lot of the research that people have indoctrinated, even though, or I shouldn't even say research, the beliefs that people have indoctrinated over generations that aren't really based on fact, is some of that when you study the microbiota is proven false. So suddenly things like dairy actually is pretty nutritious. Things like a little bit of alcohol, fine. Things like coffee seems to have protective elements. So a lot of this allows, I find, more flexibility. So I hope, even though I'm saying like, really this is like a lifestyle shift, not just a, you know, a short-term cleanse, I hope, and that might seem a little like, oh, that's a lot. The good news is this is going to protect you from having to eat perfectly. So some of the biggest things, what we're going to talk about next is what all the stuff I sent out, what we're going to be doing over the next 3 weeks. But what I mainly want to do is try to simplify this into a couple things. So this may have been confusing the way I laid it out. This is the first time I've done this program this way. I've done it with individual clients, but it's the first time I've done it this way. I've tried to match what I perceive as most people who work with me's expectations of like a short term, people have done cleanses with me and they have some expectations of what that's going to look like. So trying to balance that, trying to balance a couple different things with trying to give you an idea of what this would look like long term. So if I was to break this down to priorities, the priorities would be this. Number one is fiber from plants is going to be your first and foremost focus. That's not true. There's a tie for first and foremost focus. So, sorry, just picking my dog up. So having lots of vegetables and lots of different kinds of vegetables is really, really important. So this is Lua, everybody. Hi, dog. This, by the way, is incredibly good for your gut bacteria, is pets and petting pets and kissing pets and having dirty, filthy, gross little bug machines around is one of the best things you can do generally for your health. It actually helps prevent allergies if kids are exposed to it. It generally makes your immune system stronger. So pets, there's actually a internet kind of do-it-yourself microbiota shift diet that says, you have to have 40 different types of food a week and pet 40 different animals. So just so you know, this is part of the lifestyle of someone with a healthy microbiota, if you like animals, is to spend some time with animals and don't worry about the cleanliness thing. Okay, so where was I? Doggo, you interrupted me. Fiber. So fiber is is the key area that I want you to focus on. So this is, I don't want you to get stuck in a rut of like, fine, I'll eat 5 servings of vegetables, but it's going to be the same damn vegetables every week. I find people will always find like loopholes to make, no matter how specific I get, to make my diet or nutrition programs kind of unhealthy. So I'm going to encourage you to try to like look at the spirit of this as opposed to following it by the letter. So the spirit of this is we want diversity. So diversity is key. So you want to make sure that you're getting a diverse amount of overall foods. So somewhere between 20 and 40 different foods in a week. And then I'd say somewhere between at least 10 different vegetables in a week. So when you're eating your 5 servings, they're not always the same 5 things or always one thing 5 times. I want you to get a diverse amount. And if you don't like vegetables, well, first, that's going to be a problem. But second, I don't believe you. You've probably only had poorly prepared vegetables, not fresh vegetables, because sometimes it doesn't matter if it's organic or not. Like strawberries are a good one. I don't care if you have an organic strawberry you want to give me. If it wasn't picked within like 24 hours, I don't want it. It's no good. So food, there's different food quality depending on how far it is away from being picked, about, how it was grown, how it's cooked, it's going to vary. People use enough salt. People who don't use enough salt when they cook drive me mad. So there's definitely a lot of variables. If you don't like vegetables, one, I don't believe you. You just haven't had the right ones yet. I find a lot of times it is a mental thing, especially for men. It's somehow like entrenched in men is like a machismo thing with like, I don't eat vegetables. Like, I'm a cowboy. You're no cowboy. So I invite you to put that aside, put your I don't like vegetables, if that's you, aside for a moment, and then instead be curious about what vegetables you could like. So start discovering, playing with new recipes, trying new things, trying new vegetables, and try to discover things you like. Even if you don't, you're like, I like these 2 vegetables, throw them in the Facebook group. I'll try to give you some ideas of maybe similar ones to try or ways to prepare them. We'll do our best. But the more diverse the food you're getting, the better, and especially with vegetables. So number 1 priority, if you were like trying to simplify this experience, would lots of vegetables and a diverse variety of vegetables. I don't really care if they're cooked or raw, except for the prebiotics in the chart. Somebody's in the chat here. Let me just pause and check. Sweet potatoes, absolutely vegetables. I am very against villainizing any whole food. So I'm a potato fanatic. I don't eat plain potatoes very often, even though I love them. But sweet potatoes are absolutely part of a very nutritious diet. That is considered a vegetable. You can also consider, for the purpose of this reset, you can consider legumes and beans as vegetables in your servings. So if you have, like today I had a salad, I had, technically, corn is more of a grain, but I had beans, cucumbers, tomatoes, peppers, there's, I don't know, some other stuff. You can also consider fresh herbs as vegetables. In a salad, then I'm having, I probably had the equivalent of probably 3.5 servings, and I had a variety of different vegetables. And then, I have a different kind of a green salad tonight. I'm going to have probably over the course of a week, probably about 30 different vegetables, honestly. So that's kind of where we're ideally setting. Certain vegetables are, there's 3 priorities. No, just kidding. There's 2 priorities and then one like just slightly lower. A lot of these vegetables, you actually get more benefit out of them if you have them with fat. So I want you, and research is really, really good for a Mediterranean style diet with quite a bit of olive oil. So even in societies where it's like their diet is about 40% fat, and a lot of that's from olive oil, they still have lower rates of heart disease, lower rates of cancer, lower rates of a lot of pretty much any inflammatory disease, and they don't weigh more. So use olive oil, use olive oil liberally, especially with your vegetables. It's really good. So I don't really care necessarily if they're raw or cooked, except prebiotics. So in your chart, you have like pick from this column, etc., which I'll go over in a second. You have the prebiotic column. And so prebiotics are food for bacteria. So that's what bacteria primarily eat. Good bacteria primarily eat. So the more of the prebiotics you eat, the more naturally you will just colonize more healthy, good bacteria. Bacteria that doesn't, gobble up more calories, make your body absorb more calories, make your body store more sugar, make your arteries harder, make your blood pressure go up, all of this kind of stuff. So we want lots of those bacteria. So I don't really care if you prefer vegetables cooked or raw, except for that category. They lose 1/3 of their prebiotic benefits if they're cooked, except somewhat onions. So as much as possible, have those items raw. So for instance, when I had my bean salad today for lunch, I had, a couple, probably in a serving, or the few servings I had, probably 1 clove of garlic and probably half a shallot chopped up in there. And so those qualify as my prebiotics. In a salad, I'll throw some dandelion greens in, or I might, put them in a saute. But ideally, I'm going to have them raw, bananas, things like that. Bananas don't have very much of the prebiotic in them, unfortunately. If you can find chicory root, which I have not thus far been able to, you can even have dried, by the way. But if you can find either raw or dried chicory root, that's going to be your best bet. And then not on the list of really great prebiotics moving forward is actually wheat germ. And so even bread is a really great source of prebiotics. We're excluding it, and I will explain why. Not because it's bad, it's just a temporary thing, but I will explain why in a second. But yeah, so priority 1A is fiber-rich vegetables, plant-based fiber. We want a lot. So just to give you an idea, the typical North American chicory root tea, that is a great question, Jackie. I'm going to have to do some investigating of whether no, it wouldn't work because it's the inulin, so it's the fiber in that chicory root that you need to consume. So chicory root tea wouldn't. I mean, I'm sure there's a small amount of fiber in it, but it would definitely be very limited. Plus of the heat. So I'm gonna say no, but I will look into that. So thank you. I like the way you're thinking. Just to give you an idea, most people are like, oh, I'm fine for fiber. They maybe eat a lot of fruit, but fruit actually, in terms of what your bacteria thrive on, fruit doesn't offer a ton. So it mostly comes from vegetables and legumes and grains. So if you don't get a lot of fiber, you're in good company, because the average North American only gets 10 to 15 grams per day. So let's compare this to when they study the Hadza tribe, which is a tribe in Africa that is the last natural hunter-gatherer society. So they're the closest thing to our hunter-gatherer ancestors as we can study. They consume between 100 and 150 grams a day. So we're 10% of what we used to be, what our body is probably designed to be. And the recommendations are somewhere in the like 20 to 40 range. Some people put it, on the low side. I think you have to be above 30 to really see some really good health benefits. So we want to, if you don't eat a lot of fiber, so if you eat a lot of meats, you don't eat a lot of vegetables, you're probably quite low on fiber. Or if you eat a lot of processed food, quite low on fiber. So you might want to up that slower. Otherwise, you're probably going to get bloating and gas that's a bit uncomfortable. And I will warn you, with this diet, there's probably going to be, for me, it was like 3 days. And keep in mind, I have a very crappy digestive system. Like, as a child, I have to work really hard to keep it moving smoothly. Not really hard, but I can't cheat for long periods of time without paying for it. You will probably, in this first week, be uncomfortable a little bit here and there. As some bloating happens, as your bacteria is balancing and changing, it creates more gases. So, which actually do have protective benefits for our body, crazy enough, the gases that we release. Anyways, so just be aware, there's definitely certain things like peppermint tea that can help release it, stomach massages, going for walks. And some of it, I'm going to be like, can you stick it out? If it lasts for more than a week, then we probably have to do some adjustments. You're probably having stuff that just isn't working for you. But generally, as long as you're doing this thoroughly, it should be gone in a few days. Another thing, sorry, I just mentioned, I just saw this note. Approximately 12,000 species in our gut. That sounds like a lot. But other places like, Amazonian tribes that eat more naturally actually have 16,000. Just 30% more. So we have a lot of room to grow the diversity of our gut. And the more diverse we have, more bacteria, the better. So again, we can't precisely get, say, like this bacteria, that bacteria, but when you overall increase the diversity, you're going to see the health benefits. So so that was priority one. I can tend to do a little of this, so I try to bring myself back. So the other kind of co-priority is fermented foods. So making sure, because those are probiotic. So prebiotic, or the fiber, is we're giving the good bacteria enough to eat so that it can thrive. If I actually was to prioritize I would say that's number one. Number two, slightly less, would be probiotic foods. So foods that have different bacteria in them, to just literally, so it's like the fiber and the prebiotics are like tending to the soil, which is really, really important. And then probiotics are like adding some more seeds. So like you have a grass with, getting overrun by dandelion, you throw more grass seed on to kind of crowd out the dandelion. This is what we're doing with probiotics. Again, with probiotic supplements, when they do, not studies, but when they do trials where they go into like a health food store and check, a lot of these products don't actually have live bacteria in them. They're completely functionally useless. So it's a hard one. You're gambling with your money a bit, and you're also gambling that you're going to pick the right strain. So some people will be like, probiotics didn't work for me. Well, you potentially didn't need those strains though. So there's people who are tried just, shot in the dark probiotics, whereas if they try one that is specifically researched, strain specifically researched for their thing, like say IBS, they're more likely to have better results. But I like it to come from food, because you know whether or not the bacteria is alive, because there's some bubbling or there's a certain smell, or like it's sour taste. Like we have ways to know whether something is actually live fermented. And also we can usually control it because we can make them quite easily. There's still some risk. You want to make sure you get from somebody who hasn't heated it. So you want it as much as possible to be unpasteurized, unheated. I find the less it's been traveling around, the better. The more locally it was made, the better. The higher the quality ingredients it was made with, the better. So I try to do smaller companies just because I find that they tend to have higher quality. Or maybe that's just my delusions. So we're offering some probiotics to our body as well through fermented food. So again, with a fermented food, I want you to think about variety. I want you to think diversity. Our goal is diversity in the gut, so our approach is going to be diversity. So we're going to have a diverse amount of vegetables, and we're also going to have a diverse amount of probiotics. So that's why I have you picking from different columns. So I want you to try different things at different times too. If you really hate certain things, I'm not going to tell you to keep eating them, but notice you will develop a taste for it. I think milk is super gross, and I grew up on like really good farm milk. I just don't like it. I think it's gross. I'm actually developing a very strange taste for kefir. And I generally just don't like dairy in general. But I'm quite, I don't know, kind of enjoying it. So even if you don't like it initially, because I hated kefir when I first tried it, just give it a couple tries and see if you don't develop a little bit of a taste for that kind of sourness. Our taste buds change, somewhere between 24 hours and a week. So if you just keep trying something, you will develop new taste buds and you will develop potentially a taste for something. I'm not going to recommend that as a strategy for something like cigarettes, which is not good for you, developing a taste for it. But if you wanted to, I think it's really important to develop tastes for things that are good for us, if possible. So have a diversity. So for me, I have some local plain, it can't be sweetened because sugar is actually added. One of the reasons that sugar started getting added to all the processed foods is to actually prevent spoilage, because it actually inhibits bacterial growth, which when we thought bacteria was bad, seemed great. But now that we know bacteria is good, doesn't seem so great. So when you add sugar to a fermented product, you're essentially getting rid of all of the benefits. So you can add sugar right before you consume it, but if it's in the ready product, not great. So you can do a kefir smoothie. If you buy the kefir plain and then add some sweeter fruits to it and make it a smoothie, that's fine. But if it was prepared with like a strawberry flavor, not great. So I have some, local live bacteria. It says live culture on the ingredients. Yogurt. If you make it, great. I read the recipes online and I'm like, oh, sounds so complicated. Bad, Christy. Kefir, and some cheeses. So I say in the I'm just going to pull up exactly what I said, because I changed my mind so many times about what I was going to put in this. So I put unpasteurized cheese, high quality. So in North America, we got very crazy with hygiene, and actually to our grave detriment. And there's actually, if you put a map of, antibiotic use and just hygiene stuff and a map of obesity, they will match up. That doesn't necessarily mean cause and effect, but there is a strong correlation. So it's generally not great to over cleanse things, including our food. Places like France, where they have stuff that's literally cheese that's literally teeming with bacteria, has a lot more health benefits. So you're welcome to have unpasteurized cheese. If you can find it in North America, it's going to be hard to find. But as a general rule, I try to find stuff, it would probably be in with pasteurized milk, but then bacteria has been added since, and it hasn't traveled a great distance. I try to find stuff that, is locally made with high quality products as best you can. Cheese actually is a great source of probiotics. So especially Gouda is especially good. Softer cheeses like high quality cheddar, if it has an orange dye, there's some really good cheddars that actually are orange, or some good cheeses that are actually orange, but generally cheddar shouldn't be. Parmesan, Swiss. There's the farmers market in Edmonton, if you happen to be in Edmonton where I am, there's a guy that makes locally, Sylvan Star, who makes the most amazing Gouda and Swiss. that are just lovely. And I only have like a little bit, but especially if you're having a lot of fruit. The problem with tooth decay, if you have a lot of fruit or sweet things in your mouth, cheese will actually help balance that bacteria. So if you eat cheese after, it actually helps with that. Traditionally, cultured sour cream. So you can find some sour creams, really high quality. I have one that they add some probiotics to it after, because it is cultured, but then a lot of it in the processing just isn't viable anymore. But they'll add some. So as long as it says live cultures, otherwise you can make it really easily. And then, you maybe want to pick some from the soy and some from the vegetable and some from the drinking category. So I want you to have as much diversity as possible. Every day I have some kombucha, and then I have either sauerkraut or the fermented salsa or kimchi, or sometimes all three. And then I have sometimes I have miso. I really like miso. Sometimes, and then most day, I think every day I have some yogurt and some kefir and a little bit of cheese. So you want a variety as much as possible. I'm going to look at the Italian market in Edmonton for some brine fermented olives. I haven't found pickles that were brine fermented yet. I know there's people in Edmonton who do that, but just some ideas. So again, we're looking for diversity. So those are the two priorities. The third the third level of priority would be, I don't necessarily care too much where you're fat. No, that's not true. So in the Facebook group, Ashley said, I'm used to cooking with coconut oil. Do I have to switch to olive oil? The answer is no, it's fine. Adding some olive oil is good, in dressings and stuff, because it does help vegetables. It does help for you to get as much benefit as possible out of vegetables. And a lot of our bacteria is really fat loving. The important thing to know is I do not want you to go low fat. That is the important thing. Low fat is very bad for your gut. So do not do that. High fat in terms of like processed food and a lot of meat, not great. But if you're getting your fat from moderate amounts of dairy and eggs, which means, like a couple servings a day, and then lots of good oils like olive oil, nuts and seeds, another one. So nuts and seeds had almost the same heart protecting qualities as olive oil. So having lots of nuts and seeds is really great. Full fat, absolutely yogurt. I don't even see the point in low fat yogurt, but also a lot of the goodness gets stripped away. So yes, full fat yogurt, no added sugar. And you can also cultured butter. I didn't add it as like a probiotic, but I'm not discouraging you from using cultured butter. And then Greek or regular, either is fine. Greek has more protein, which tends to be better. So again, if you find like often I find the Greeks are really low fat for some reason, which isn't great. So as minimally processed as possible, as local as possible is kind of where I want you to put your priorities. No sweetener, typically just the milk and then the bacteria is like the only ingredients. Other than that, you can kind of play around with what your flavor, your tastes are. But yes, Greek is higher in protein, so it's great that way. That's a little less processed typically. Okay, so let me just go through. We're running out of time here. I thought I was going to be like ending early. Anyways, so let us start with what you have here. So we're removing sugar and sweeteners. I don't necessarily have a problem with you having a little bit occasionally. I really don't. This is less about what you're removing and more about what you're adding. Hopefully that it was clear from the priorities that I just listed. It's just that sugar is detrimental to your gut bacteria. If you are someone who is really good with moderating, then a little bit here and there is not that big of a deal. If a recipe calls for like a teaspoon here and there, it's not that big of a deal. What I want you to avoid is having, adding more sugar and sweeteners. And if you're someone who is like an all or none, like I have a sugar addiction, go off of it. I'm going to really encourage you to go off of it for 3 weeks. You will notice that your cravings will go away probably within a week. So I really do think for most people, breaking that habit is really good. If you don't really have a strong sugar habit, don't worry too much about it. So the sugar exceptions are if it's naturally occurring in food, so it's in a whole food like fruit. There's some people who want you to reduce your fruit for your gut. I will never really tell you to do that with a whole food. long term, if you eat a lot of fruit, you may want to, and you're not particularly feeling healthy, you may want to consider reducing it a bit. But generally, I'm not going to worry about fruit. What is used to ferment the item? So, for instance, there's sugar in kombucha, but it's used to ferment. It's used to feed the bacteria. So, a lot of those drinks, kvass, coconut water, kefir, tepache, they're feeding off that sugar. They need that sugar in order to ferment. So, you can't take the sugar out. So that is an exception. And then I have up to 20 grams of dark chocolate with 85% cocoa per day. If you go down to 70% dark chocolate, that's totally fine. The benefits for, it's not like there's no benefits to milk chocolate as long as it does have real cocoa in it. It's just that when you weigh the extra fat and sugar against the benefits of cocoa, it no longer is a great prebiotic, which is why I've included it. Chocolate's actually a decent prebiotic. So I don't care if it's 85%, it can be down to 70%. I want you to have dark. And I'm not really stuck on the 20 grams. I just wanted to give you guidelines. But a little bit, and the benefits typically in research show when you have it a little bit regularly, as opposed to like, I periodically binge on chocolate. That's for most of these foods, because your bacteria only change once they're exposed to something over time. So as much as you want variety, you also have to have some consistency. So if you like chocolate a lot, add a little bit to your regular routine is much better than just being like, I only have it once every 2 months and then I binge. There's not really much benefit to that. It's not going to hurt you, but it's not much benefit to that. I'm running out of time here, but I do want to talk about antibiotics for a minute. So I might end up talking about this more in another class. Antibiotics. So here's my thing with antibiotics. People just think they're completely risk-free, harmless. People don't put any thought into taking antibiotics, like literally none. And it's funny because so much of the public discussion is about the dangers of vaccines. And there are very real risks to vaccines, and I can talk to you about that, but they're safe, and they have done huge benefits to humanity. But yet we are in such a constant debate about the safety and efficacy of vaccines, but we never talk about antibiotics. And if there are 8 most of the most common adverse effects of medication, 5 of those 8 are antibiotic related. Antibiotics cause most of our adverse medication reactions. So antibiotics they have very serious side effects. So I'm going to ask you, this is a dangerous area, because if you need to treat something, if you have an infection that, like a bladder infection that could spread to your kidneys, that's serious. If there's certain things that I want you to be careful about, but about 40% of what we use antibiotics for, in some cases, in some districts throughout North America or the world, way higher, the antibiotic use is 40% completely functionally useless because it's done on viruses, or it's done on mild infections that would clear up. It's only going to shorten, like, for instance, most sinus infections by about a day. They will clear up naturally, and we're only shortening them by about a day. Colds, completely useless, and it's actually incredibly damaging to the rest of us. I'll talk about that more later, but I wanted to put that here quickly right now, is that for mild infections, you're going to have to use your judgment, but antibiotics, actually, the risks far outweigh the rewards. And they are more, I don't want to say them dangerous, but there are side effects that are not being considered. So for the time being, you're going to have to use your own judgment, because I cannot tell you what to use antibiotics for, but you really have to be specific about any antibiotic wash. I want you to very much take out for the period of this reset. So if you use antibiotic soap and stuff like that, one, it's been proven not to help with dangerous bacteria any more than just hot water and soap and a good cleaning, and 2, it's actually really detrimental. Okay, there's a question here. You mentioned bread in the Mediterranean diet, but then see no gluten. I know. Why should we go gluten-free? I have a sugar-free bread I like. So I wish I didn't have time to talk about this, but I'm going to have to maybe include it in the email and then talk about it in more depth. Here, I'm going to quickly talk about it. So part of this reset is that I do not believe gluten is bad. I do not believe any whole food is bad and you should cut out grains or anything like that. However, there's enough evidence that gluten causes more of our intestinal wall to be porous that I thought it was worth it in a reset to take it out as we're trying to heal the gut lining. Bringing it back in after, I think, is completely beneficial. I generally recommend people stick to stuff like sourdough. It is fermented. There's no probiotic value because it's heated, but it is essentially pre-digested by bacteria. Rye breads are really good. So there's definitely certain breads that are better than others. Like sugar-free doesn't tell me anything about the value of that bread. But I would like you to stick to gluten-free for this reset, not because bread or grains are bad or gluten is bad, only because there's enough evidence that it causes more problems for the gut lining that I feel like it's worth it to take it out for 3 weeks. So that's my little thing on that. So we aren't taking it out in the first week. Yes, that's right. So I think I'm just going to look to see if there's anything else here that I really want to make sure I cover. Yes, we're not even taking out the gluten stuff until the second week. We can talk about it in more detail. I do think it's worth it temporarily, but again, this isn't saying that it's a bad thing. So I'm only going to cover the first week. We'll talk about the second week next week, but I think hopefully covered enough about the first week to give you some information. And I'm just going to quickly tell you what we're going to talk about overall the next few days, and then I promise to end. I usually will. I'm very good at ending on time, so I apologize for this. So next week, we're going to talk about mood, personality, brain function, and lifestyle stuff. And then we'll also talk about week 2. Class 3, we're going to talk about inflammation, including things like cancer, heart disease, Crohn's, colitis, IBS. All that stuff is going to fall under inflammation. Depression even falls under inflammation. What's the... Oh my God, blood sugar one. Oh my God. Diabetes, wow, is inflammation. Blood sugar, weight. We're going to talk all of that in class 3. And then class 4, we're going to talk about your children and their bacteria in case that's a thing that interests you. Extra stuff that I just, it'll be like where I put stuff that I didn't have time to talk about maybe, or who knows, and then what to do moving forward. And I'm going to do a bonus class for you guys, interviewing a friend of mine who actually had a fecal transplant for a serious infection, and then she ended up dropping like 90 pounds. It's a really interesting story, and so sorry, fecal transplants. It's a really interesting topic that I would really like to cover, and we'll do a bonus recording for that. It'll probably just be a recording. It may be live. I'll announce that. Okay. So if you have any questions, if I didn't get to something, if I told you I was going to do something and forgot, please either send me an email or ideally put it in the Facebook group, just so then everybody get a chance to learn from your question. Everybody gets a chance I can answer everybody at once. I just prefer it. Yeah. I hope first day went well. Let me know. If you have problems, don't suffer in silence. Let me know. And I look forward to continuing our fun together with our probiotics. Okay, see you guys.